So thank you very much to be with us today. Well, the residents have continually refused to be on the interviews or shows like this.
Right.
So it's quite an exceptional, rare occasion, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
レジデンスはめったに人の前に現れないんで、インタビューというのは非常に珍しい機会だというわけなんです。
Well, it's basically based on your concept of theory of obscurity or tactics or strategy of obscurity. Could you explain a little while about it?
Well, the theory of obscurity, the theory of obscurity is a principle that the residents worked under a lot in their early years. When you are sitting in the middle of a department store in a big record store, it's hard to be very obscure, so the theory no longer holds. But the theory was based on the idea that the more secrecy that an artist used in which to create his work, the more pure the work will be. And initially, this is what was very important idea to them, to keep their work very pure. So consequently, they did as much of their work as possible in secrecy and shrouded themselves in secrecy. Once again, it's not really a valid idea for them, but still one that they found interesting.
何言ったっけ訳してやっぱり。
何言ったのいや、それは、まあthe residents というのはそうやって、インタビューを拒否したり何したりということで、一応秘密の戦略というのかな、少し隠れてあるっていうタクティクスをずっと取ってきたと。で、細川が訳すと思って僕はほとんど覚えてないんだけど、まあ結局こういうマスメディアサーカスの中では全てが表層化されて流通してるわけだけれども、その中で、アーティストが自分の作品をいささかでもピュアなもの、まあ純粋なものに保つためにはですね、ちょっとそういうメディアサーカスから距離を置いて、いわば穴の中に隠れるような感じで、いることが必要なのではないかと。それがまあ言ってみればobscurity、少し隠れて暗くあることの戦略だというふうな話です。
On the first record, as a Meet the Resident, you're incarnated into the figure of fish, Ringo Starr fish, John Lennon fish, and George Harrison fish, and later you changed your animal, your kind of totem in eyeball. What is the basic idea to choose the eyeball as your figuration, as your figure or your appearance?
Well, the eyeball originally was an idea for the Eskimo album. It's hard. This is something that came from the residents themselves that they wanted to do this.
Yeah.
They never really said what exactly the idea was. My own feelings are that it's sort of a way of looking back at the world, and a lot of what the residents like to do is look at the world, take it inside of them, twist it a little bit, and then feed it back out.
Yeah.
And I think the eyeball is just the residents' way of letting the world know that they're looking at them. It's the residents' way of letting the world know that they're being watched.
Yeah. レジデンスの最初の LP、ミスターレジデンスでは魚がなんていうのかな、魚がビートルズのメンバーの名前にくっついているわけなんですが、その後この眼球っていうか目の玉のレジデンスになったのはエスキモアルバムからなんですが、その目というもの、眼球というものをどうして選んだのですかというこの僕の質問に対して彼の答えは、その目によってそのレジデンスの世界の見方をはっきりと示すため、レジデンスがその過去を振り返るときに使う道具というのは目なのだというような大訳するとそのようなことを言ってました。You think that the big bubble is a more refined, sophisticated one, which cannot be regained by, which is not the same as the Eskimo album.
Right. Once again, I think that there's a certain roughness and directness that the residents wanted to get with the Big Bubble.
Yeah.
Which to a great extent was successful.
Yeah.
But still, it still comes across as a very sophisticated record. There are the very early tracks of that that are very rough.
Yeah.
They're very rough, but they wanted to polish them a little bit more.
最近のビッグバブルズという日本語でも出てるアルバムなんですが、それ にも、その、初期に録音した、エスキモーの頃に録音したトラックが入っていたりしているんです。で、その、エスキモーの後でも、それからその前でも、その、音楽を、その、洗練していく過程っていうのは常に行われているというようなことであります。
Well, after the figuration of eyeball, then came the mole, moles and chaps. It's mythology. Well, and obviously, this figure of moles is closely related to the concept of holes or underground culture itself. In this case, underground is not in figurative meaning, but literary underground. It's a hole, you know. Well, and for example, I attended last night's show. I was impressed. It was amazing. But you know, it was so crowded, and it was just as though we were in a huge shelter, sort of shelter against nuclear warfare or something like that. And it was so crowded. There are many people, and each of us has a very tiny space. 50 centimeters by 50 centimeters or something like that, and pressed each other. So there was a fierce struggle for space among us, you know. Well, I think this concept of underground culture and sort of struggle, and at the same time sort of peace or something like that between people in the whole, is a very interesting point of view, activity. Concerning moles, sure.
Yeah, well, the residents obviously have been very interested in primitive people, and having worked so much in the, you know, so-called underground.
And troglodyte.
Right, right. I mean, it has been written that the whole story of the moles is actually an allegory of the story of the residents themselves. And the residents leaving the safety of the underground in order to come out and do appearances like this is very much like the story of the moles leaving the safety of their homes.
And these appearances are very risky for them.
Right, right.
It's exposure.
Right.
If it contains some risks and dangers.
Right.
まあ一応魚の格好の後こういう目玉の格好がなって、その後モグラっていうのが出てくるんですけども、でそのモグラっていうのは多分そのアンダーグラウンドカルチャー一般みたいなものと関わってるだろうと。ただそのアンダーグラウンドっていうのはその文化的な意味でアングラっていうだけじゃなくて、文字通り穴、地下の穴みたいなものです。で、昨日のショーに僕は行ったわけだけれども、それはまあ言ってみれば核戦争後のシェルターみたいなところでみんなが押し合いへし合いしてて、それで、もう限られたスペースをめぐって悲惨な闘争があって、僕は細川氏の隣に割り込んで、その隣にいた人にものすごい怒られるという悲惨な体験をしたんですけども、で、そういうふうなこと全般をどんなふうに考えているのかっていう話をしてて、で、彼によるとそのモグラ、モールっていうのは、まあいわばレジデンツ自体のアレゴリー、寓意であって、で、レジデンツは普段さっき言ったようなマスメディアから少し距離を取ってそういう穴の中に、安全にいるわけだけど、時々こうして危険を冒して出てきて、こうやって姿を現したり、ショーをやったりすると。So, please go ahead.
I have to say that when the residents read that someone was comparing their own lives and stories to that of the moles, they thought that was quite a funny idea. There was another writer one time that wrote that he thought that the residents were actually 4 interior decorators that all lived in a large warehouse in Los Angeles, each one having his own floor decorated to his own taste. And he nicknamed them the 4 interior decorators of the apocalypse. They like that quite a bit too. So it's hard to tell what they believe and what they think.
Well, the Eskimo, the backing to on the underground culture in general. What is the connection, or what kind of relationship does the resident have with the San Francisco culture, San Franciscan culture? For example, I'm thinking about the acid culture in the 50s and the 60s. Flower movement is a famous one.
They actually have very little formal connection. I know the residents were in San Francisco when a lot of this music was happening.
Yes.
They were just starting to do their own music at the time.
Yes.
And a lot of the acid music was very influential on them. I think they felt like in a lot of ways, a lot of the people that were doing that music that was very innovative in the 60s became very commercial, and the ideas became very dry in the 70s.
Yes.
And I think they saw that as a certain inspiration for themselves, because these were ideas that could be pushed further.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of what they were trying to do.
60年代のサンフランシスコのアシッドカルチャー、ドラッグカルチャーとか、そのアンダーグラウンドカルチャーとの関係は聞いたんですが、非常に、関係はしてるというかな、そんなに、でも特になんか入れ込んでるっていう感じはないんですけども。I hear that so can I? For example, the other aspect of the acid culture will be represented by the Philip Dick. Philip Dick, the fascinating science fiction writer. And I hear that the resident member have already seen many times the Blade Runner film.
Oh, definitely. They, a couple of the residents have been very big Philip Dick fans.
Yeah.
And actually, I think one of them talked to him on the telephone one time. Gary Panner, who is an artist that used to live in Los Angeles, lives in New York now, and has done a lot of work for the residents, a lot for Ralph Records. I think he's recently done a lot of stuff in Japan.
Yeah.
His wife was very good friends with Philip Dick, and a couple of the residents were over at his place one time, and she was talking to Philip Dick on the phone, and she just gave the phone over to one of the residents, and they had a short little conversation.
Dick and Dryden have met.
Well,
one of them spoke to him on the phone.
ドラッグカルチャーのまた別の一端として、フィリップ・K・ディックなんかと、どういう関係があるんだろうかということで、Go on.
Yeah. And
実際にレジデンスのファンの一人は、
What kind of impression do you have on the Blade Runner, for example?
とにかく、ディックの小説の大ファンだし、それからみんな、ブレードランナーの映画を何度も見て、かなりマニアックに喜んでいたというふうな話です。
Film, not his own. Because, for example, the first scene of the Chinatown in the future city is so impressive for me. A kind of mixture of the old culture and old popular culture and high-tech culture. It means which can be seen also in the Eskimo urban and residence. It mean the primitive culture of the Eskimo races and the high technical musical synthesization.
Right. Yes, sort of a strange mixture between what is primitive and what is high-tech, or the dead-tech and high-tech, sort of.
Right. The residents are very fascinated with primitive cultures, and I think in a lot of ways they see our modern superficial society as sort of crushing a lot of the primitive aspects that have been with us for a long time, and they don't really want to see these things go. And this is a lot the reason I think that they reinforce a lot of primitive things in their music. In a lot of ways, the more sophisticated the music gets, the more they feel the necessity of keeping a certain primitive quality. Once again, this is why on the latest album, they use no drum machines or anything. Everything is done very much live in the studio. Which is a very different approach for them, but it sort of allows them to get back to the basics and keep a certain primitive quality.
例えばフィリップ・ディックの続きでブレードランナーという映画の最初のそのチャイナタウンのシーン、非常にローテックなっていうか大衆的なものとそのハイテックな未来都市のイメージが奇妙に混合してるっていうシーンがあるんですが、それが例えばエスキモーっていう彼らのアルバムにあるそのプリミティブな 文化とそのハイテクなミュージックの電子音楽との混合というようなものと非常に連想ゲーム的にこうなんかくっついているものがあるというふうな僕の考えなんですが、彼らは今そのプリミティブなものになんか変えろうとしている、そのプリミティブなものを決して忘れないような方向に進んでいると。最近のアルバムでもドラムマシンを使わないで非常に原始的な電気装置で音楽を作って、これは大変彼にとって難しいアプローチではあるけども非常にやりがいのある、でこれからやらなくちゃならないアプローチだというようなことを言ってます。
And the shows you gave in Japan is sort of a cabaret, not a sort of huge performance like Flunky Goes to Hollywood or something like that, but cabaret, electronic cabaret in a very tiny spaces, right. And this concept is maybe be connected with what you told.
Yeah, the residents actually this show, the latest show that has just been playing in Japan, is very much designed to be electronic cabaret. The last show that they did was a big stage production, and they had 20 backdrops that were all very large, 15 feet high, 10 feet wide, and they did about 30 shows in Europe with this very large show. Mm-hmm. And while they really enjoyed that, part of the idea of getting out and leaving is to have more contact with the audience.
Are you okay?
Part of the idea is to have more contact with the audience.
Yes.
And so they really wanted to do a very small show this time.
Yes.
To go into smaller places with closer audiences, and just be more sort of cabaret style.
Yeah. 浅田君の質問はエレクトリックキャバレーというようなものが最近彼の昨日見たショーから思い出されるけども、
でだから大コンサート、フランキー・ゴースト・ハリウッドみたいな大コンサートもあり得るけれど、あえて小さなスペースでそういうキャバレーっぽいことをやると、しかもエレクトロニクスを駆使してやるっていうのは今言ったことと関係があるでしょうかっていう。
それでつまり観客との直接的なコンタクトを持つためにはそれまでやってた大きなショーだと非常にうまくいかないと、それで日本でやったような小さなショーをやり始めたということなんです。実を言うと僕は去年2年ぐらい前にイタリアにいる時に彼らのモールショーを見ていて、でそれが非常に引き金になって次のウェーブっていう雑誌に載る論文を書いたりしてるわけなんですが、what is the basic difference from so the mole show is totally different from the show you gave in Tokyo. Not only the dimension, not only the numbers of the musicians and dancers, but also the basic idea is different. It is not the reduced version of mole show, but also but totally different thing which you have just now begun. Is it right? But before the mole show, you gave some show. For example, I'm just thinking about the photograph of which album? Fingerprints, I think. Your live show at Berkeley.
Right.
It was very small and still obscure show. That show was a little like show in Tokyo.
Well, I would say actually you're probably right.
Yeah.
I mean that show.
And 76.
Yeah, okay. It was about 10 years ago, and
yes.
Actually that was, put together for one single performance.
Yes.
And that performance was done. But I think that you're probably right. In general, it was very similar in some ways. Once again, I think the primary thing here is that the residents really, in terms of more or less coming out from the underground, they want to feel like they're actually getting contact with people.
Yeah.
And by doing a smaller show, a more intimate show,
yes.
they actually feel the presence of the audience. The last show that they did, which was the Mole Show,
yes.
Okay, all the music was done with the residents wearing headphones.
Yes.
And it gave them a very efficient system for monitoring their music.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it very distanced and removed them from the audience. They had headphones on. They played behind a screen.
Yes.
And a lot of times they couldn't even tell if the audience was applauding or not.
Yes.
And after it was all over, they said, "Okay, well we've played live, but have we really played live after all?"
Yeah.
Because we couldn't really get the feel of the audience.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot the basis for this show.
モールショーという非常に大きなそのショーの前に小さなショーもやってたんで、それはフィンガープリンスという LP がその辺にどっかにあるんですが、ないか。フィンガープリンスという LP の裏面に出てる76年のバークレーでやったショーの写真が1枚だけ残っていて、それは非常に小さなショーらしくて、女性の歌手が1人歌ってるだけっていうような感じなんですが、それはそのレジデンスが地中から地上に現れた時に、観客との直接的なコンタクトを持ちたいと思って考えた小さなショーだった。その後、モールショーでは非常に観客との距離が空いてしまった、非常に大きなパネルがあって、で、メンバー自身はモニターで耳で、ヘッドホンでモニターしながら聞かなくちゃいけなかったりというような、非常に巨大なショーになってしまったので、今回では、それまた元の小さなショーに戻って、その観客との直接的なコンタクトを求めようとしているということなのです。
And what about the story itself? Between the music you played on the latest show or the music which we can hear in the Big Bubble album
right.
is somewhat different from the music, for example, of the tunes of Two Cities. The tunes of Two Cities are very interesting, but the new music has an aspect which has a far more intense black humor or something like that. It's far more strong.
Right.
So maybe they may have a sort of accident or warfare, something like that between these two albums, didn't you? We don't know very much about the history between molds and chaps, something like that. Maybe after the tunes of Two Cities, maybe war may have broken out between molds and chaps or something like that.
Well, the story is basically told on the first album, The Mark of the Mole. Okay, the tunes of Two Cities, the residents create fictitious music of two fictitious cultures. And the music is supposed to be, more or less music that could have happened at any time in that culture. In other words, it's not necessarily related to the story itself as more background information to tell what these cultures are like. Sort of like publishing books that were mold books or chub books. The newest album, The Big Bubble, is more fictitious music, but it's after the two cultures have combined. And so the story ends at the end of Mark of the Mole with the two cultures in conflict, and the conflict is yet to be resolved. So what happens is then the story skips, say 20 or 30 years, and then you have a band that has grown up with after the cultures have started mixing.
From cross-hybridization.
Right, exactly. So this is a band that's made up of very strong mole and chub influence. And this band will then play a strong part in the story once part 3 of the story comes out, which will complete the entire trilogy.
Okay. We'll wait for it. それでショーの中身の方なんですけども、一応モグラ族と、チャブっていうのはなんていうのかな、魚を食うというよりは魚の匂いを嗅いで陶酔する人たちなんですけども、そういうモール族とチャブの戦いのストーリーがあるわけです。それで1枚目のマーク・オブ・ザ・モールっていうのは大体2つの文化があって、それが葛藤するんだけれども、まだその葛藤は解決されないというところまでを描いていると。で2枚目の二都音楽というのかな、その2つの都市のTunes of Two Cities というやつが、その2つのカルチャーの、特色を見せるために、お互いの曲を1曲ずつ交互に出している。で、その3枚目、それから今度のショーでやったような音楽っていうのは、それより随分テンションが高い感じがする。それブラックヒューモアの程度が高まっているような感じがするんだけども、これはどういうふうに位置づけられるのかっていうようなことなんですけども、それは一応その2つのカルチャーが接触した後、2、30年スキップした後にですね、そのモール族とチャブ族のなんていうか異種交配から新しいバンドが生まれてきて、それがビッグバブルというバンドなんですけども、それが過去の記憶に基づいて音楽をやっているっていう風な、そういう設定になってるらしいです。よくわかんないけど。 で、それ第3部が出て、そのビッグバブルというのは第4部、3部作の第4部なんですけども、今度第3部がちゃんと出るとストーリーがわかるということです。
So you another series of your series of recording is called The American Greatest Composer. The first issue has been already released with the name under the name of George Gershwin and James Brown.
Right.
Do you continue working? The residents will continue working on that series.
Right. The residents actually plan the American Composer Series to eventually encompass 20 composers.
Yeah.
The next record is already in progress.
Yeah.
And it will have the music of Hank Williams and John Philip Sousa. There are a lot of other composers that the residents want to do, including Stephen Foster, Captain Beefheart, possibly Bob Dylan.
Yeah. Smokey Robinson. Yes.
Smokey Robinson is one that they're interested in doing. Charles Ives they're interested in doing.
Yeah.
And these records will be continued to be released until the series is finished in the year 2001.
Yeah. So you would like to identify yourself in the history of American music and with this series of recording, or you would like to present your idea, your perspective of American musical history in general.
Right. One of the things that, as I was saying before, sort of the idea of taking the eye as a symbol of the residents, looking out at reality, bringing it in, twisting it, and turning it back.
Yeah.
Okay. They enjoy doing that with American culture or Western culture, but particularly American because they're Americans.
Yeah.
But they enjoy doing that with music more than anything else because this is the medium in which they've worked the most. So one of the two lines that the residents sort of parallel creative lines that they've worked under a lot. One is to create brand new music that's never been heard before, that's totally original. The other one would be to reinterpret music that's already existed.
Yeah.
And they really enjoy doing both.
Good. レジデンスは今、アメリカングレートコンポーザーっていうシリーズのレコーディングをずっとしてて、第一作は、ジョージ・ガーシュウィンと、ジェームス・ブラウンっていうのを、二人を表と裏に使った、レコードがもう発売されてるんですが、そのシリーズで、これからも仕事をしていくんそうです。それで、第2部は、ハンク・ウィリアムス、カントリーのですね、ハンク・ウィリアムスとスーザ、マーチローのスーザと、二人を扱ったレコーディングをすでにやってあって、今、発売の時期を待っていると。で、その他に、スモーキー・ロビンソン、モータウンの人ですね、それから、スティーブン・フォスターとか、チャールズ・アイブスとか、キャプテン・ビーフハートとか、いろいろアメリカの、彼が考える偉大な作曲家の、レナード・
バーンステイン。
ブルース・スプリングスティーンとかね、そういうアメリカの Great Composers の曲を自分たちのバージョンでやり直すということで、まずは過去を見直そう。その他に、まだ誰もやったことないのはオリジナルの音楽をやっていこうっていうのは、未来と過去と2つ戦略を分けて活動していきたい。で、レジデンスの眼球っていうのは、眼球のモデルっていうのは、その外を見ながらそれを内へ見返すっていうのかな、ひっくり返ったような眼球のイメージがあるんだけど、そのひっくり返っている時のねじれをもっと利用して、過去と未来と両方に伸びていきたいというようなことを今話してました。So, Bruce Springsteen, why Springsteen?
No, I said actually Leonard Bernstein, not Bruce Springsteen.
Excuse me. バーンステインでちょっと僕の聞き違いでした。
レナード・バーンスタインの方でした。
全然スプリングスティーンとは関係なかった。Sorry, I'm just...
No, it's okay. Yeah. They might do Bruce Springsteen someday, but he has to get a little older first.
Yeah. まあ、スプリングスティーンもやるかもしれないけど、もうちょっとね、彼が追いボルてからだって。Well, so ね、now the time, if the first age of first generation of psychedelic culture in the 60s is matured in the California with many, I think, very stimulating culture in the 60s, and now the 80s it has the new psychedelic culture. It is so-called new psychedelic culture, which is now kind of a retrospective idea on the mode, on the fashion and the culture scene, on the music scene. Do you think that that kind of new psychedelic or the old psychedelic is connected with the residence activity, residence work?
Well, once again, I think that it was definitely connected in that.
Yeah.
That was music that the residents listened to a lot during their sort of years that they were forming their ideas.
Yeah.
I mean, they listened to a lot of music at that time, including a lot of soundtrack music, a lot of music from various different cultures. So it was definitely influential on them.
だから今最近ニューサイケデリックというようなことが言われてますが、かつての60年代のサイケデリックとそれから今のサイケデリックとレジデンスは非常にその関係を持ちながら活動を続けているというような。
I know that a lot of the really psychedelic music from that era that they listened to a lot at that time.
Yeah.
Some of them have gone back to it and listened to it since then, and found it not to be quite as strong or to have quite as much staying power as it seemed like it had it originally at the time.
Yeah.
I heard one of them commenting the other day that really they felt like, in terms of rock music, most of the music that was done in the 50s and the early 60s, when the genre was alive and really being invented, that's actually more the stronger material than a lot of the late 60s stuff that's really more derivative of the original.
Yeah, so the residents have more connection with the early 60s? Or
well, I think they have ultimately more respect for it.
Respectful.
Like the mid 50s to the early 60s.
So Little Richard, Presley and the Boss, example, is a number which show your attitude towards the culture of the 50s.
Right.
60年代というよりむしろ50年代の方がレジデンツにとっては重要で、例えばエルビスと親分っていうんですか、そのメモリアルヒットにも入ってますが、そういった曲でエルビス・プレスリー、50s という50年代文化とのつながりを彼らは非常に持っているというようなことを今話したんです。
Well, let me pose a very silly question. Well, coming from the West Coast to this condensed media situation in Tokyo, well, maybe you may have a lot of impressions, and etc., etc. But what is the major impression you have?
The major impression that all the residents have overwhelmingly is very positive of Japan. They actually haven't had a whole lot of time just to be out looking around, but every time they drive from one place to another, they're constantly staring out the window. They went to a very small place in Shinjuku the other night. And matter of fact, they stayed out a little bit too late.
In Kabukicho or something like that?
I'm not really sure. It was a very small bar.
Yeah.
ウエストコーストから日本に来てどういう印象を持ったかっていう、非常に凡庸な質問をさせてほしいというんですけども、そうするとレジデンツもたまには穴から出て、下界を眺めるっていうことが必要で、そういう意味では日本ではとってもポジティブな体験をしたと。で、この間は新宿のどこかよくわかんないんですけども、すごいちっちゃいところで夜遅くまでいたりして、とっても面白かった。
It's like they went to a very small bar, and there was a woman that worked in there that served them, and the bar only had 7 seats, and it was the residents and Snakefinger and 2 more people.
And you yourself?
Yeah, one of them was me, right? And they sat there for a while, and I don't know, the atmosphere as sort of, in the United States, there's so much space. and you get in Tokyo and everything is so small and everything has been compacted and miniaturized, and you would feel that coming from America, you would think that to go into a bar that only had 7 seats, you would feel very claustrophobic and very tight and confined. But actually, it was very warm. It was very pleasant. And then after being there for a while, a middle-aged Japanese man came in with an accordion that he played. And at first, everybody thought, oh well, he's just going to play some sort of schlocky American standards, play Misty or something like that. And then he started playing, and he played beautiful traditional Japanese music, and had a wonderful singing voice. And they're very moved and touched by it.
Good. It was a very good hole for the moles.
Very much so. Very much so.
先日その行った小さなバーは席がカラオケバーだったんですね。それで、席が7つしかないと。で、広大なアメリカから来るとですね、広大なアメリカでもしそういうバーに入ったとしたら、ほとんど閉所恐怖症になってしまうんだけれども、すべてがとってもコンデンスされて、コンパクトにミニチュア化されている東京では、不思議とそういうところでも割と平気で、そこで、日本の中年のおじさんがやってきてカラオケ歌ったりなんかしたらしいんですけども、それとっても感動的であったというようなことです。
何かあるかなと。会場の
So, and what about this space, for example? This is a huge record shop.
Well, actually, the residents haven't really gotten much of a chance to look around. I know I've been looking around quite a bit while we've been having the interview. And it's a very interesting looking record store. I mean, they have talked to... They've talked to Fred Frith and some other American artists that have been here, and everybody that has talked about Wave have been very positive about it. I know that actually they're looking forward to being able to go back and slip off their eyeballs and their coats and sort of come back in a little later and look around and look at the store.
まあ、それじゃあ、こういうお店みたいなものに関してはどうかっていうことなんですけども、まあ、フレッド・フリスとかいろんな人から、例えばウェーブっていうののことを聞いてて、なんかウェーブの宣伝係になったような感じですけども、まあ、みんながとっても、この店はいいというので、来てみたと。で、レジデンツのメンバーも後で普通の服装に着替えてですね、密かにレコードを見て回りたいと思っているというようなお話でした。And the city in general?
Yeah, いいの。
どうぞ。
いいの。
So, in Tokyo there is a strange mixture of what is very tiny, miniaturized, compacted, and what is huge and gigantic and totally functional kind of things. So there may be a possibility of strange mixture, of hybridization of mass culture and very minor culture or underground culture, something like that. And in comparison with the situation in the States, what is your impression or opinion like as to this?
Well,
for example, the shows in Tokyo was, the place for the shows were on the top of department store in Tokyo. Right. It's quite paradoxical, isn't it? At the top of the department store, there is a hole, and in which we felt as though we had been in a nuclear shelter or something like that, crowded, compacted, etc., etc. It was very paradoxical, amusing, and at the same time quite embarrassing. Something like that.
Yeah, it's very different from the United States too. I mean, you do have a situation here where, if you go to a department store in America, it's a department store. I mean, you won't go there and see concerts. I know there are department stores here where they have movie theaters. There is a lot of sort of cross-culturalization here. That's very interesting. I mean, the fact that you see so much English, and the way the Japanese will just pull out a few words of English and just put them in is very interesting because, once again, you don't get this in America. In America, it's English and that's it. And you might see a little Spanish here and there or something like that. But the fact that there is so much sort of crossbreeding between the cultures is very fascinating.
Just in the Blade Runner,
Right, sure, exactly, same thing.
で、それから昨日のショーなんかは、デパートの上にあるホールでやったわけで、で、キンキラキンのエレベーターに乗ってデパートの上に上がってみると、いわば穴蔵みたいな空間があって、で、そこで、核戦争のシェルターに入ったような気分で、ああいうものを聞くというのは、面白くもあるけれども、なんとなく当惑するような気分じゃないかしらということを聞いたんですけども、実際その東京で起こっているこの種の、異種交配というのか、一種の、なんていうのかな、横断的な結合のようなものっていうのはとっても面白いと。で、アメリカではデパートはデパート、で、コンサートホールはコンサートホールと、こういう種類のその横のぐじゃぐじゃのつながりというのはちょっと非常に奇妙な感じがするっていうことでした。それで、特に日本人が英語の言葉を少しずつピックアップして、で、適当な文脈に置き換えて使っちゃうっていうことにすごい興味があって、それはとっても面白いんじゃないかっていう話でした。
The lab ball figure? Sure. I mean, they didn't really know anything about it, but I can talk about it. So, sure.
Here's the show. The eyeball show of the residence is mostly inspired by the Japanese little monster fantastic monster called Zashikiwarashi. It is a tiny monster on the tatami sheet. Is it true?
Actually, the residents had never really heard of the Japanese character until just a few days ago.
The Gegege Kitaro da.
And one of the what happened was one of the residents' fans made a small ceramic figurine for him. It was it's just very, very beautiful. It's a small female figure with a big full dress, and then it has an eyeball on top of it. And this was sent back to the residents after the show. And included in the box were these small plastic figures, one of which was the small eyeball figure. And then the next day, during some interviews, one of the writers brought the comic, or a copy of one of the comics, and the residents have all looked at it and they've been very interested in it. But it's just a coincidence. It's the same.
Was it female? I think it's male.
Well, the figure that was made for the residents was female. But okay. The
original
one looks right.
Okay.
ゲゲゲの鬼太郎のね、多分そうだと思うんだけど、コミックを彼の、その小さな陶器製の、なんかそのミニチュアマスコットを、そのコンサートの後にファンが持ってきてくれて、それを説明を聞いてなんか日本でも同じようなことを考えている人がいるというのを知って非常に興味深く思った。それはただの偶然だけども。But I hear that you have another project of comics, which includes comics of
Moles and Chubs?
Moles and Chubs, right. There are a lot of comics that have been done. These are done, these are not published by us, but Ralph Records sells these comics. They're done by an artist in Pennsylvania that publishes them himself. And I understand that Wave is interested in compiling all of them, and perhaps putting out a book, which would be very good. They're very good comics.
ゼリーには自分自身の漫画のシリーズがあって、それは自分たちで売らないで、ラルフレコードのペンシルバニアのある出版社の人に渡してしまったので、今彼が持ってる、それ多分ウェーブがその出版経営交渉をしてるんじゃないだろうかって、でもし出版されることになったら非常に素晴らしい漫画なので見てくださいということですね。
So, for the closing, let me talk about the little monster, Zashikiwarashi, he just mentioned.
Okay.
When children gather together in remote Japanese countryside, when children gather together and count their numbers by themselves, for example, the result, 13, but evidently there are only 12. So they count again. The result, once again, is 13. So the Zashikiwarashi is this extra one. This is a very fascinating idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very interesting.
And maybe this kind of existence, nowhere and everywhere,
Right.
Always being an extra one is very good, totem or symbol for the residents.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
So maybe you have remote ancestors in.
I think that's actually very parallel. The residents are sort of there and they're never there.
So,
I mean, you wonder who they are, but if you found out, you probably wouldn't care.
それで座敷わらしのことを最後にちょっと喋って、子供たちが集まって自分たちの数を数えると。例えば13人だと。明らかにしかし12人しかいないんですね。それでもう一遍数えるとやっぱり13人だと。で、この残りの1人っていうのが座敷わらしであったりするわけです。で、こういうふうに常にエクストラの1人、某批評家の言葉を借りれば幻のもう一人というのですけれども、そういう形で、どこにもいないにもかかわらずどこにも現れてしまうっていうふうなことがレジデンスのコンセプトとだいぶ近いのではないかっていう話をして、彼も多分そういう日本に、古い祖先がいるのではないかというふうなことに同意したりもしたわけです。So we wish you in the near future you will have a next tour or something like that. So
the residents hope very much to come back to Japan again. I mean, this is, once again, it's been the whole trip, the whole time here. And most of them will be here for another week, just sightseeing. But it's been very enjoyable. They've really enjoyed the Japanese people and hope to come back soon.
また日本に帰って、今回はあまり時間がなかったけど、またゆっくり帰って。
Anniversary tour, we are going to take a look at some of the video history of the residents tonight.
Welcome back to Night Flight as our video vault opens up for The Residents, San Francisco's most famous underground band. The Residents are known equally for their broad spectrum of rhythm and atonal sounds as for their pioneering work in music video. Formed in 1974, The Residents satire record company Image Packaging. They've never identified themselves by name, nor have they ever appeared without some kind of disguise. Nightlight presents a special interview with The Residents and brings you their video classics.
Earlier on, when the Residents became the Residents in 1972, they were working on a full-length film feature, Vileness Fats. It was designed to be a 2-hour feature, but one of the things that the band felt to be the charm of the project, the naivety of the project, eventually sadly became the downfall of the project. 1 minute of some of the rough footage of that film eventually became one of the first video projects self-directed by the band, Third Reich and Roll. Third Reich and Roll made such an impact on the video world because of its unusualness that it later became a segment of many of the archives of Museum of Modern Arts across the country and the world. One of the later projects, the next project actually that was conceived by the Residents was Hello Skinny, which was a cut from the Duckstab, Buster and Glenn LP and was directed by Graham Whiffler. Won many awards and with its striking still photography and still animation, and later became one of their most popular works. After Hello Skinny made such an impact on the video world, they went on to release a collection of some of the songs from the commercial album. It was titled The 1 Minute Movies, and it was 4 songs from the commercial album, which was an album of 40 one-minute songs. These were directed in part by Graham Whiffler and in part by the band, the first of which is Moisture. The second one of the 1 minute movies was Act of Being Polite. And that was also a cut from the commercial album, as I said earlier. And that was directed by the band. The third selection in the 1 minute movies was Perfect Love. Featured some puppets of the Residents that you'll see, and that was also directed by the band. You did a fine job, I might add. That was Perfect Love. Is there anything you might want to say about that? Well, I guess we should move right into Simple Song. The 1 minute movies were designed to highlight some of the commercial album. What do you think was the message of that album? I guess the Residents have always felt that they'll leave that up to you. We'll be back with more Residents on Night Flight's special look at the 13th anniversary tour. We're back to the Night Flight's look at the Residents' 13th anniversary tour. And I guess the next thing we should talk about is the James Brown epic, It's a Man's World. This is a video taken from the American Composer series, the George and James installment, which was George Gershwin. Oh, no, actually it was along with that project, it was a single released with the album. And George Gershwin on one side, James Brown on the other, and Man's World accompanied that release. And it was a collection of computer animation and very interesting footage that goes along with the song, and it's featured in the show. So let's take a look at that now. Well, that was certainly interesting. Do you have anything you might want to say about that? Well, one thing they did tell me to say was that they wanted to pay homage to James Brown. They have a great deal of respect for him, and that was something that they really enjoyed doing and that they want to do in the future. Actually, part of the American Composers series is highlighting brilliant American composers, and the next installment in that is the John Philip Sousa Hank Williams project, and that'll be out in the fall of '86. Fall of '86. The next thing we're going to see has never been aired before. Well, actually, we're taking excerpts from a home video that is kind of a scaled-down version of The Mole Show, which toured Europe and made a few appearances in the United States, and was also coupled with edited versions of Violence Fats, which was, as I said before, the full-length movie that they were unable to finish. And these are excerpts that were scaled down and converted from the original footage and put onto video. Well, we're here in the Night Flight Studios because we're on the 13th anniversary tour of the Residents, the first time that the Residents have been presented to the United States en masse. One of the things that, sadly but true, has happened on this tour is during the Los Angeles performance on December 26th, one of the eyeballs was stolen. We're very upset about this. The Residents have suffered a horrible violation of identity, and we're making an appeal to the public that if you know anything about the eyeball or about its whereabouts, to please write to us, and write to the Cryptic Corporation at 566 Folsom Street, San Francisco, California, 94105. We all sure want the eyeball back. It's been a dear friend, and we're kind of upset that it's missing, so if you could help us out, we'd really appreciate it. Also, the tour is going all over the country, and we hope that you can come see it. And do you have any final words you might want to say about the tour? And what might you want to say about that? Oh, thought we were going to have a little speaking there for a moment. But alas, they don't speak, so that's why I'm here. So anyway, this has been Night Flight's look at the 13th anniversary tour of the Residents, and we're sure glad we could be here. You glad? I'm glad. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the tension mounts, the web of security tightens as we await the arrival of Ralph Records recording artists, the Residents. We understand that the Residents have in fact left their Toronto residence in their very first visit to Canada. We understand also that they have taken taxi cabs. No doubt this is to be considered a diversionary move in order that the gangs of Residents fans that we are expecting will not be able to get access to them. Undoubtedly, they have sent the limousines off in a different direction to fool the fans. Any minute now, we expect that the Residents... Cool it down back there! Just cool it, all right? You'll get your chance. The Residents will be arriving. Hold him back, if you could, please. We have a promise of security performance here that we have to live up to. Michael, I believe that the Residents should be here any minute now. We're very eagerly, we're waiting for the sight of their gelatinous orbs in the back seat of a taxi cab to arrive at any minute now. There's been a lot of sort of false hope built up. And we are waiting a sign, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. On the Residents' watch, this is Christopher Ward outside of Much Music Studios. Yes, the Residents have arrived, ladies and gentlemen. This is a very exciting moment. Their career has been veiled in some obscurity up until now, and we don't expect this episode to be any different at all. Please keep the fans back. We want to retain absolute total security as much as possible. You've witnessed the kind of things that have happened outside of this building for the likes of Nick Rhodes, Simon Le Bon, Iron Maiden, and Paul Young, but we have not seen anything like what is happening right now on the streets of Toronto surrounding the arrival of the anonymous Residents, Ralph Records' ace recording artists. They are just waiting now, I believe, for the traffic to clear. Yes. There they are, please. No, hold it. No screaming until we see the whites of their eyes, please. Hold it. Here they are, ladies and gentlemen. Will you please welcome Ralph Records recording artists, the Residents, to Toronto. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Keep the fans back. Keep the fans back. Welcome to Toronto. Welcome to the frozen north. Very good to have you here. And welcome to you as well.
I'm never going to watch this.
Hold them back, please. You're witnessing it live on national television. The arrival of Ralph Records recording artists. The Residents, ladies and gentlemen, the Residents.
Christopher Ward will be with the Residents momentarily. As you can see, they are wandering around our studios, just sort of chilling out, as you would say. Yes, getting in from the cold. This is their first time in Canada, I understand, in something like 14 years.
Yeah.
Or is this their first time ever in Canada?
Oh, I think it's probably the first time.
The first time ever. So in Montreal, don't forget the Residents will be playing there, and they also are playing in Toronto. And I mean, look at those heads. I mean, you're talking about men with brain power here, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be no ordinary interview with Christopher Ward and the Residents, plus their spokesperson, the only one that speaks, because the Residents, well, I will tell you no more. You will have to wait and see.
Very nice to have you all here today. Ralph Records recording artist, The Residents, from San Francisco, California. And would you also please welcome Homer Flynn, who is the spokesman for the band and also for the Cryptic Corporation. Welcome, Homer.
Hi. Hi, Chris.
Nice to have you here today.
Well, it's nice to be here. We've enjoyed our stay in Canada so far, and hope we continue to.
Yeah, this is the first visit for the band to this country, we believe?
Definitely. It is definitely the first visit. And if the reception in Toronto is anything like the one in Montreal, the band will be back just as quickly as possible. It was a great reception in Montreal.
Oh, terrific. We're glad to hear that, because I know that performing is not something that the Residents usually do. They're more recording act, we understand, and video makers.
Historically, they are definitely a recording act, as well as video makers, but their interest in performing live has really increased a lot over the last few years. And so I think there are probably going to be more performances and more concerts. But it's a pretty unpredictable situation, so we'll just have to see.
Now, Ralph Records is based in San Francisco, we understand, and there are also other artists signed to the label, like Tuxedo Moon and Snakefinger, and you also distribute records through Ralph. How does the Cryptic Corporation and Ralph Records, how's that all work?
Well, the Cryptic Corporation did own Ralph Records up until about 6 months ago, and we recently sold it to the man who was the sales manager, and really he's running Ralph Records now. The Cryptic Corporation actually are the managers for the Residents. We really handle all their business affairs. When they have projects, like there's a big video project that we've been trying to get financing on for some time now, and we've been handling all the details on that. We set up the tours for them, produce the videos for them. So we generally handle all their business aspects, as well as doing some projects on our own, but the Residents are mainly what we're concentrating on right now.
Now, the Residents have been recording for over 10 years now. Well, the first album was called Meet the Residents, is that right?
Right, that's true.
And you've ranged musically through an incredible variety of styles. Are they just relentlessly curious to explore different areas, or what's made them keep changing like that?
Well, the Residents started out with the idea of trying to make each album as different from the previous one as possible. And it has a lot to do with just, as you say, a relentless drive towards experimentation. I mean, they really like to try different things. They don't really, whereas it seems that most artists are not really content until they can make things sound, you know, almost like one thing comes directly after another with very little change in between, a sort of a seamless sound from album to album. The Residents really like for that to change and continue to surprise their fans because they don't really know what they're going to do next.
We have the video for Hello Skinny now. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of what went into that particular video, and especially for our fans at home who are used to much more mainstream music. Maybe you could tell them, offer a warning, if you will, for what to expect here.
Well, let's see, that's a good challenge. Hello Skinny was actually made by a very talented filmmaker, Graham Whiffler, who was the staff video artist or filmmaker for Ralph Records for about 2 or 3 years in the late 70s. He made that, as well as Tuxedo Moon's video, as well as MX-80, Snakefinger's, and he did 2 of the Residents' 1-minute movies. The video itself is a collage of still photos that then has a lot of movement put into it by moving cameras. And from my standpoint, I consider it, if not the best, definitely one of the strongest of the Residents videos. It has a lot of depth to it in that you can watch it over and over and over again and continue to get more out of it. You see more detail, and you see the arrangement of the still photos in terms of the flow is very interesting. There's a lot you can get through multiple showings.
Okay, well, let's take a look at it now then. We have the Residents and Hello Skinny for you on Much Music. There you have Hello Skinny from the Residents, and we are here, as you can probably see, with the members of the Residents and also with Homer Flynn, spokesman for the band, and from the Cryptic Corporation. Now, we understand that you had an unfortunate security problem recently.
Yes, unfortunately, the Residents were playing a show at the Palace Theater in Los Angeles, and there was a definite lapse in security after the show, and one of the eyeballs was stolen. And one of the residents here has definitely suffered a loss of identity.
Yeah.
And at first it was really terrible, and everybody was very upset over it. But the residents are almost fatalistic in a lot of ways. They believe that life presents you with certain opportunities, and fate comes in certain ways, and you should follow these things. You should not turn your back on them. So this resident now has a new identity. He's Mr. Deadeye, as we call him among the troupe.
Right.
And things are, life goes on. We have to do the best we can from it. There's definitely talk at one point of trying to find someone to put a curse on the missing eyeball.
Right.
But we've decided there's no reason to go that heavy with it now. So the threat of the curse has now been eliminated.
Oh, good. Now, is this a character in transition? In other words, might this particular character evolve or devolve in a new direction?
Oh, it's definitely possible. It's definitely possible. I mean, at this point, it is in transition. Whether the transition winds up with this as the reality or it continues to move, it's really hard to tell.
Now, you have done a cover version. Well, first of all, you did a whole album with the Residents of, 60-second versions of old rock classics.
Well, not exactly. Not exactly. I mean, that's sort of two different albums that you're talking about.
Okay.
The first album was The Third Reich and Roll.
Right.
Okay, and that was just sort of a conglomeration or a mixture of all 1960s, sort of 1960s bubblegum hits or trashy hits. Like
the Yummy
Baby.
Yummy and all that
Yeah,
stuff?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yummy
Okay.
Yummy, My Baby Does the Hanky Panky, Battle of the Green Berets, et cetera, et cetera. And the Residents sort of took all this and grinded it through their own personal disposal and got the parts back and, taped them all back together, and it came out sounding like what Top 40 may have sounded like had Martians listened to it and done their own versions.
Right.
The other record is one called The Residents Commercial Album.
Ah, I see. Okay.
In which they're actually attempting to do, for them, relatively commercial music. See, I'm not getting any agreement over here, but...
No, well, you can only do the best you can.
Yeah, that's right. But the hook in the thing, or the lack of commerciality, comes in the fact that all of the songs are exactly 1 minute long. And so it winds up getting no airplay, or there was one writer that referred to it as musical coitus interruptus. It's like just about the time that you're sort of getting your foot tapping along with it, it stops.
It's over, yeah.
And the next one starts and you start getting your foot tapping along with it, and then it stops. And so on one hand, there are very commercial things on it from my own point of view. But at the same time, it wound up being, sort of true to the Residents with its lack of commerciality.
Now, you've done a cover version also of the James Brown classic, It's a Man's World. What led to that reinterpretation?
Well, the Residents have been long-standing James Brown fans. I mean, they have some wonderful stories about seeing James Brown in concert back in the mid-'60s. Wonderful concerts back in the South. And like I say, have long been fans. They are in the midst of a proposed series of records called the American Composer Series, in which they take famous American composers and redo their music. And so one entire side of the first release is by James Brown. The album is called George and James. It's George Gershwin on one side and James Brown on the other.
Right.
They're also in the midst of their second album of this series, which will be released next fall, and it's John Philip Sousa and Hank Williams.
Oh, excellent choices.
So they have a lot of interest in doing other people's music as well as their own.
Now, has James Brown heard this version? Do we know?
Not that I know of.
Oh.
Not that I know of.
Well, hopefully you'll hear it in the future. We're going to play it for our viewers right now. This is The Residents on Much Music, and it's a man's world.
And they do this live in the show.
It's a man's world from The Residents on Much Music, and we understand that there is the Residents records are hard to get. They're not available through the normal commercial means. Is that right?
Right. There's no actual distribution as such in Canada. It's something that we hope to take care of soon. But as of right now, the records are only available through mail order.
So when is the date today? It's the 24th. Yes, there it is. It's the 24th at the Music Hall on Danforth Avenue in Toronto. And I am looking forward to this because it's been, 14 years of recorded work and the first performance in Canada?
Right. Right.
Like
Well, this will be the second one. We played, Montreal was...
second, yes, of course, yeah. And, well, we're going to wrap it up anyway with one of the illustrious one-minute movies. Oh, and just before I do that, I would like to make a presentation to the various members of the Residents here. Hope you'll be able to wear this in good health. Much Music T-shirts. There we go. And for you. Thank you. And for you as well. And Homer, a little souvenir of your visit here to the nation's music station.
Wonderful.
And I don't know, is there some creative way in which the band could introduce Moisture, the 60-second movie that you think? Without words? Is there a way to introduce a video without words? Here it is.
I think. How did you discover the Residents? I first discovered them through maybe an Austrian musicologist that I met on holiday in Austria. One year I had a tape of them, and we decided to go off to California and meet these people who were making this kind of music. What was it that attracted you to it all that time? Well, they seemed to be using a very odd-scale system, which was something that this chap Anson was very interested in. He was recording bad noises all the time with some sort of power break there in the middle. But so we decided to go to California and see what was going on there. And I understand some sort of moderate commercial success with Chili Willy and the Red Hot Peppers. Why did you decide to step out and do your own thing? Well, personally, selfish reasons, because I like music to keep interesting for me, and I was kind of bored with the way that music seemed to be going in the way. It was very, rock and roll was basically been sort of dead for considerably long amount of time, equally as long as swing was dead when my folks were still listening to it, and I was a musician by choice, but I needed music to be more interesting, to keep me going, to keep me having fun. So I was looking for new aspects of music, things that would change and keep me interested, keep the fun going. Would you care to put a description on what you're doing to create a label? I'd like to, yeah. So lots of people, I'm sure, have helped. So if you can come up with a label, please send it to me from San Francisco. Please send a label for my music.
Hardy, it's the 13th anniversary of the Residents. Have there been any lineup changes over the past 13 years?
No, I don't think that would work. I mean, what would you do if you decided not to be a resident anymore? You could go out and start your own, band with no visible members.
I just wondered, because I saw the guy, I thought the skull, there's only 3 eyes and a skull now. I thought maybe you had a new member.
No, that's because it's much sadder than that, An eyeball missing, stolen. Yeah, it's the crime of the century.
And you don't feel compelled to make another eyeball?
Well, eyeballs aren't replaceable. Each one was made for the resident that wore it. And, I mean, if you lose yours, you have to pay the price. And we have someone paying dearly.
Do they ever reveal their identities to musicians that they work with?
You mean like Snakefinger? I think that Snakefinger may have found out at some point. I'm not sure. Actually, I know myself.
It must be difficult for friends and relatives of the band if they're in on the secret. It must be difficult to keep it quiet.
It is. It is. I've heard mothers be sad they can't brag, but they seem to get over it.
Well, there's been many musical fads and fashions come and go since the 1970s. Have the residents been influenced by any of those changes?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that just a couple of months ago, they discovered Michael Jackson, and they discovered the concept of dance music. And so they've released a new record now, a new single, Kalijah. And to do it, they not only discovered dance music, but they decided that they should take Michael Jackson's rhythm track off of Billie Jean and use that to build a song on. So they did that just by transferring it from a CD digitally to the emulator digitally, and it becomes playable.
Would the residents like to be called a rock band?
They're real mixed on it. Sometimes I think that they're very offended that they would be considered a rock band, but I've seen them also go in record stores and find their records in the rock section and be very happy because they were a rock band, which means that they were acceptable on the mass level. They weren't some esoteric thing. They were a rock band.
Yeah. The residents seem to...
They're not going to like some of the things I'm saying, I can tell already.
They seem to enjoy poking fun at the music business and show business in general. That's my impression I get from the residents.
Who couldn't poke fun at it? It's ridiculous. But in a fun sort of way.
Are we ever going to see the faces behind the eyeballs?
I don't know. Probably not. I don't see why anyone would find that as interesting as the way they look now. That it's possible that maybe they could remove the eyeballs and reveal their faces. But if they did, it would probably be like another mask of a face of someone else. I mean, maybe they would just exchange faces or something, but I don't think they'd reveal their own face. Actually, one of the most recent album covers has the picture of 4 very normal people on the cover, partly to use they hired models. They ran an ad in the paper, and they hired models to come in, and the idea was that this was like a new way of concealing your identity, of just hiring someone to stand in and be a face for you.
Are there any women in the lineup?
I could check in the restroom later. I don't really know at the moment.